I lived as an ordinary person most of my life, even though I was living a parallel and increasingly sick life.
Ed Kemper killed 10 people, including his mother. He also has an IQ of 145. Turned himself in voluntarily and spent over a decade being interviewed by the FBI. Those interviews are not a footnote in criminal psychology. They are foundational to it. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit used conversations with Kemper to build the profiling framework that is still used today. Here is the problem. Kemper knew exactly what they were looking for, and he gave it to them.
I was raging inside. There was just incredible energies, positive and negative, depending on a mood. That would trigger one or the other. And outside, I looked troubled at times. Other times I looked moody.
In the late 1970s and early 1980s, FBI agents Robert Ressler and John Douglas conducted a series of prison interviews with 36 convicted murderers. The goal was to understand how serial killers think, not from theory, but from the killers themselves. Kemper was the most cooperative subject they had. He was articulate, introspective, and could describe his own psychology in precise clinical language.
Why did you actually kill the girls?
My frustration, my inability to communicate socially, sexually. I wasn't impotent, but emotionally I was impotent. I was scared to death of failing in male-female relationships. I knew absolutely nothing about that whole area.
He explained his thought process in a way that fit neatly into the frameworks the researchers were building. Those interviews produced the organized/disorganized offender model. They shaped how the FBI categorized crime scenes, built profiles, and trained agents for the next 4 decades. Kemper is cited in academic literature, documentary series, and law enforcement training manuals. He is, in many ways, the primary source. There is a documented problem in psychopathy research. When researchers interview high-intelligence subjects, the dynamic changes. A low IQ subject answers questions. A high IQ subject reads the room. They pick up on the hypothesis, the framework, the emotional response the researcher is hoping to produce, and they deliver it.
A little isn't enough. At first it is. And as you adjust to that, psychologically and physically, you take more and more and more. It's the same process.
Not necessarily because they are lying, because performing is what they do. It is how they have always operated in social environments.
You were able to appear like an ordinary person, non-threatening to...
I lived as an ordinary person most of my life, even though I was living a parallel and increasingly sick life.
The technical term for this in research methodology is demand characteristics. When a subject unconsciously or deliberately responds to what they think the study is designed to find. In ordinary research, you control for this. You blind the subjects. You vary the framing. The FBI did not do that. They sat across from Ed Kemper, told him what they were studying, and asked him to explain himself.
You get the knowledge to outsmart the police.
Watching television, believe it or not.
Here is the part that does not get discussed enough. The subjects the FBI interviewed were not a random sample of violent offenders. They were selected in part because they could communicate. Kemper was valuable precisely because he was articulate.
I wanted to love my mother, and I watched the alcohol increase. I watched her social life drop off. I watched her get bizarre. She had terrible pain from her life, earlier life, her upbringing, a failed marriage with my father. I'm a constant reminder of that failure.
Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Dennis Rader. That is not a research sample. That is a casting call. The foundation of criminal profiling was built on testimony from the subset of killers who were unusually good at talking about themselves, and unusually good at reading what their audience wanted to hear. This does not mean that everything built from those interviews is wrong. Some of it holds up. The organized/disorganized model has been criticized for decades, but has also been refined and partially validated. What it means is that the field was built on a sample where one side was always performing for the other, and the researchers did not know, or did not fully reckon with, which side was in control. When Kemper described how he thought, he may have been accurate. He may have been constructing a narrative that fit the FBI's framework, because that was the most satisfying thing he could do in that room. He may not have been able to tell the difference himself. That is the part no follow-up study can resolve, because Kemper is still the primary source. The FBI interviewed him for over a decade. He was cooperative, consistent, and insightful. Whether that makes him reliable is a different question. If this kind of thinking interests you, the gap between what looks like evidence and what actually is, I wrote a book about it. It's called Pattern Recognition: Think Like an Investigator. It breaks down the frameworks investigators use to read situations, spot what's being performed versus what's real, and ask better questions. Link is in my bio on Linktree. Subscribe to Pattern Interrupted for more.